here we are. So, I am here today with someone who has got more podcasts than I have, who has been doing this kind of thing far more than I actually have, which is very rare to meet someone who's more of a professional talker than I am. And this is Andrew Heaton. So, Andrew, well, you prefer being called Heaton. How are you doing, sir?
I'm great. Mike, it's a pleasure to be on your show. I'm coming to you from Austin, Texas, the Shrewsbury of America. I don't know what the London of America, or the London of Texas. And I'm doing great. Have been very busy of late, just adopted a dog. I'm spending lots of time with friends and being productive on the various shows that you referenced that I'm up to. So yeah, I'm well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. I'm still getting through a little bit of a cold. So it's my throat is a little bit rougher and I look a little bit worse for wear for any of the YouTube watchers. But yeah, aside from that, I'm doing okay. Myself and my partner Megan, we've just gone through and bought a house and we exchanged contracts. So we pick up the keys in a few days. So it's our first property we've ever owned. So I've been saving up for a long time to do it.
I am a renter, but one of my goals is to eventually buy a home and date a Megan.
Nice.
While neither of those have happened yet, I hope to emulate you in both counts.
Well, thank you very much. Well, yeah, so it's been very busy the last few months, and now it's like, okay, now we're shifting gear from searching for a house and things to now we've got it. We're going to be doing things.
Where did you buy a house? What part of England do you live in?
So I live in Southampton. So I live right near the bottom. There's a little bit that comes out, which is the Isle of Wight. And that's, there's like a crack in England, like the butthole of England. And right next to it, it's not really, I like Southampton, but Southampton's like right next to it. It's just really dead straight down.
Southampton is the county or the region?
It's the city.
It's the city. Oh, okay.
Yes.
So where would it be in regard, I know Scotland really well. I kind of know England, but I don't know southern England too. So I've gone to Portsmouth and I've gone to Bournemouth.
Portsmouth's where I was born. Portsmouth is right next to Southampton. It's 20 minutes up the road.
Okay.
They're like rival cities.
That's a lovely part of the country.
Yeah, I was born there. I like both. I've got friends in Portsmouth and my mum's side is from Portsmouth and my dad's side is from Southampton.
So I did a study abroad at Oxford, and then I went back years later, and I lived there just as a townie doing odd jobs. And I was at a bar about a month ago, and I really freaked out a couple of girls from Oxford that were visiting because we're talking, and I'm like, so Oxford, are you from Oxford proper? Or are you from oh gosh, I went blank. It was going to sound so cool. I was going to list all the surrounding towns around, like Swindon. I was like, are you from Oxford? Or are you from Swindon? You're pretending to be from Oxford. And her jaw dropped. And she's like, how do you know about Swindon? And thought I was she thought she was at a game show or something, because no one had ever mentioned Swindon to her before.
That's amazing. I mean, with your life, you've traveled in a lot of different places. And one of the aspects of our conversation I was most intrigued by that I've heard it be lightly touched upon in other conversations that you've had on the internet that I've heard, but I've not listened to your entire back catalogue. I didn't have time. Is you lived in Scotland for a while, and I saw on your website there's a fun fact you like to tell people about. What don't you tell them about the distillery?
I own 1 square foot of land on Islay, where Lefroy and Lagavulin and Ardbeg come from. If you've ever had a scotch that you drank and everybody thought that you had just inhaled a campfire, that's from Islay. It's a very smoky taste. And Lefroy has a brilliant marketing campaign where if you buy certain bottles, a form will fall out, and if you fill it out and you send it in, they send you a deed to 1 square foot of land. So I did this, and they sent me this deed. So I made an international call, and I called them and went, hey, my name's Andrew Heaton. I've got a square foot of land. Can I drill for oil? And the guy on the other line went, no, it's a non-hereditary right that you've got to this land, but there's an easement on it. You can't build anything. But if you ever show up, we'll take you out to see your land, I guess. And I went, okay. And then got off that phone and then called my adopted Scottish uncle and was like, we're going to Islay. And he was like, oh, great. We'll take my car. We'll take a ferry. And because I was already going to be over there doing stand up. And so, was there in 3 weeks and rolled up and was like, it's me. Where's my land at? And they were like, oh, it didn't. Okay. All right. Here's some boots, and some whiskey. And we took it out there. My adopted uncle built me a Lego castle that we put on top of it.
Wow.
So I've got that 1 square foot of land. Someday, God willing, it'll be up to 5 or 6 square feet of Scotland.
Wow. That is incredible. I mean, also your Scottish accent was very well done there.
Thank you. I really appreciate that because most Americans, when affecting a Scottish accent, are really just mimicking Groundskeeper Willie or Scotty from Star Trek.
Yep.
Neither of which are great Scottish accents. But I've lived over there. I've drunk over there. I've slept with their women. I believe that I could I could, if dropped over there, like kind of blend in. And I do sometimes. I was at a wedding 5 years ago. And a lady was just convinced I was some guy's son. Granted, I was in a kilt and I had a beard, which for some reason makes me more I look more English when I'm clean shaven. I look more Scottish when I'm bearded. I don't know why. And, a lady came up and went, I know you. You're Ewan McGregor's son from the Isle of Skye. And I went, nope. I'm Andrew Heaton from Edmond, Oklahoma. And she went, no, you're Ewan McGregor's son from Skye. I know your da. And I was like, I promise, madam, that like my mother is not that colorful. Like there's no way she could have boned that guy. I'm pretty sure it's my dad. But if I ever need to like lay low and hide from the law, I think I could escape to Scotland, probably do it, go to some small town.
Yeah, grow out a beard.
Leicester. Anybody comes looking for me, I'll be in Leicester.
We've got it here then. That's it. That's going to be the breadcrumb. So in 10 years
there
we
you
will
go. That's going to be the thing that does me in.
Yeah, that's going to be this show inadvertently. And I'll have to make the decision when you start becoming famous from being on the law. Do I take down that episode? Is that going to draw more attention?
Yeah, exactly. You're like, I really like that guy, but he did kill all those people. I feel like I should really alert Interpol about that. He said he'd be at Leicester. There's only 2 pubs there. He's at one of them, and you'd come get me.
So out of interest, I want to kind of, as much of your life as you're willing to share in certain aspects, we're not going to go through an entire biography because we don't really have that kind of time. But from your young age up to teenage years, I suppose, did you travel around a lot, or in the place that you're living in America now, Texas is where you're living? You said you're not from there originally. So your general life up to the point that you went to Scotland, that you said you lived in for a couple of years. I know you lived in like New York and lots of other places. Just sort of a vague telling of where you've lived, a kind of timeline of where you've gone, because I'm always intrigued by people absorbing other cultures and things as they grow up and that sort of thing, even growing now.
Yeah, so I have traveled extensively, as you note, and I've lived in a lot of different locations, but all of that started later for me. I didn't leave the country until I was, I think, 19. I had never been out of the United States till 19. Which is very normal in America, particularly in Middle America, but I'm guessing be kind of abnormal in Europe and in Britain, where it's a lot easier to travel. I grew up in Oklahoma, which for your listeners that are unfamiliar with it, it's the Canada of Texas. Oklahoma is just whatever Texas is. We're just kind of a quieter version of that, directly north of it. So I don't know what region of the country I'm from. I'm basically from North Texas, and grew up there. Didn't really travel around extensively in the United States either. Like our vacations as a kid were fairly humble. We would go to Dallas to check out the Galleria, which is just a city in Texas. We did go to Disney World a couple of times. And then I went to, I think, Washington, D.C. once when I was in high school, and that was about the extent of it. So it's been fun for me because from 19 on, I really enjoy traveling and really have traveled a lot. And so I feel like I get to have kind of a Mark Twain Innocents Abroad vibe to me, where Twain, anybody who reads the book, it holds up remarkably well, by the way. The Innocents Abroad by Mark Twain. He's relaying what would be very normal about Germany or whatever to a German, to an American audience, and can see this is how it's incongruous to me given my background. And I feel like I still have that. I still kind of use Middle America as a yardstick, even though I've lived out with Middle America for most of my adult life. I graduated college or university when I was 23, and really haven't been back since that time. I mean, I now live here in Austin, Texas, but Austin is sort of like if you dropped Brooklyn into the middle of Texas. It's kind of its own phenomenon. And so it's Texas, but it's Texas with a lot of ukuleles, and a lot of psychedelic mushrooms and things. But I graduated from University of Oklahoma, left. I lived in England for about 6 months. There was it was a big contrast too. When I got out of college, my first job out of college was working on a ranch in Logan County, Oklahoma. And I went from that to going to England, where I worked for John Bercow for like 3 days, who's the former Speaker of the House. He needed like a temp, And I came in, so I got to go work from Parliament, which was a great contrast, going from mending fences and literally getting electrocuted by cattle fences on a daily basis to like being able to see Big Ben from my office window and talking to the good people of Berkshire, where Speaker Burko comes from. I didn't do that too long, incidentally. Unfortunately, it was just a temp job, although it would have been fun to work for Parliament longer. Went back to Oxford, as I alluded to, and lived there for a little while. And then I moved up to Scotland. I was in Scotland for 6 months as a tour guide, fell in love with Scotland, and have maintained that that ongoing romance with Scotland since then. Barring pandemic, I go back every year. This summer, I plan to be there for 3 months, partly because I love Scotland and partly because I hate Texas summer. So it seems to me becoming bi-coastal would be a good thing. And then I went back a few years later. I got my master's degree in international politics from the University of Edinburgh, and that kind of sealed the deal where my degenerate barfly friends realized I was actually going to be coming back regularly, so they really did need to learn my name. And now I've been to their weddings and things.
Oh,
and let me think. I got back from Britain and I lived in Washington, D.C. for a couple of years. I started doing stand-up comedy while I was there, but my day job was working for the United States Congress. And then I ended up moving to New York, and I became a television writer, and I was in New York by my count for 5 years, but I did the math the other day and it was 8 years. So I don't really know. I was either there for 5 or 8 years. I'm kind of confused about that. But I was there for 5 to 8 years working in television, which was a lot of fun. And then I moved down to Texas. Ended up moving to a different city because I had a television show that got canceled. I'm great. Everything's fine. I moved out to LA. The pandemic happened. That was horrible. I ended up moving into a camper, like a 13-foot camper for 6 months just so I could not be under solitary confinement in a converted dumbwaiter. And eventually went, you know what? I think I was right about Austin. And I moved back to Austin, Texas, in October of last year.
Wow. That's quite the journey.
Yeah, I am looking forward to just owning plants, being in a location long enough that I can have a plant.
Wow.
And prior to you coming on, oh, very nice. What is that? Wait, is that a staghorn? I can't see from here.
There's actually quite a few plants.
Oh, you've got several.
Yeah, some of them are my girlfriend's more the person with green fingers. I've got a couple of aloe vera plants that I'm very good at growing, and a couple of house plants. There's a spider plant. There's a lily there. There's a few succulents and things. There's a planty thing. I don't know what that other one is. We've got, and in the other room, we've got lots of aloe vera. Megan's growing an avocado plant, so going to be able to have avocados in theory. They're very hard to grow. And she's got like 4 orchids as well. So we are in that point. I mean, we're buying a house and she jokes to house all our plants.
Nice.
So it's a funny that you mentioned plants.
Well, plus you guys like England is such a beautiful, lush country. And I think, Charles II nailed it on the head. He described England as the best climate and the worst weather on earth. And I'm like, I think that's pretty true. Like the climate in England's actually very temperate. It's this kind of just perpetual moderate autumn, spring variance, but real rainy right out of the blue all the time. But it leads to a very lush green country. I also find that like English people, to your great credit, English people feel about gardens the way Americans do about cars. Like we put all this effort into Buicks and maintaining our car, and you guys just really work your garden. And it like gardens don't tend to wake me up at 3:00 in the morning because some jackass wants to get laid with a muffler. So I'm in the pro garden camp. I wish we were bigger on gardens.
Yeah, I mean, gardens are pretty great. I mean, I don't like front gardens as much. I think they're a waste. I think if you can get a drive and put your car on there, it just saves so much effort, saves space on the road and etc. But back gardens is like one of the things me and Megan are most excited for because we're currently living in a flat. Do you call them flats in America? Apartments?
We call them apartments, although I prefer the term flatmate. So like you mentioned Americanisms earlier. The 3 Britishisms that I think we should bring out over here. Well, actually, I don't know. Do you say out with, or is that just Scottish?
In what context? He's gone out with someone else.
No, let me think. Out with that situation. Just in place of outside of, out with. So outside of, I'm a very busy man. Outside of, that's 3 syllables. Out with is 2 syllables. I'm saving a lot of time by saying out with.
I think that's a Scottish term also.
Okay. So I that's like my one like overt pretension that I've bootlegged back from there. I think you guys are dead right about calling chips crisps and fries chips. That makes sense. French fries is a stupid term. The reason we call them French fries in America is because back in like 1900, the slang to fry something was to French it. So like a pancake would be like Frenched bread. And so French fries literally means fried fries. It's meaning, it's like grapefruit. It's stupid. Like chips make sense because you're chipping them off the potato, right? And crisps make sense because they're crispy. So that makes sense to me. The other one I really like that you guys do is flatmates, and flat, right? Because like roommate makes sense if I'm in a bunk bed. If the person shares a room with me, I've been roommates with my brother when I was very little and we lived in bunk beds. But like if we're sharing an apartment mates is too long. Flatmates makes sense. So we generally say house or apartment, but I think flats makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, flat works. Although in context of what it actually is, it's like, it's like a house, but it's flat. It's like, well, that's actually a bungalow, but they've got technically a second floor. It gets complicated when you look into the English and the American English language too much. But I will say some of my favorite American versions of English words is you've got cotton candy. We have candy floss.
Yeah.
You don't floss with that.
Agreed. That is stupid. Yeah, candy floss is dumb.
Like
Cotton
also,
candy
strawberry
superior.
laces would be more sensical to call them strawberry floss, wouldn't they? Because they're the kind of, I wouldn't want to do that with like the laces, like the chewy kind of gummy things. Another one is ladybug, because we call it ladybirds, which I think is stupid. It's just like,
yeah, that's also dumb. I didn't even know that because they're bugs. Why would you call them birds? That's stupid.
Yeah. And I mean, there's another one that I like, but I can't remember what it is. There's a few that I sort of pick up on, that Americanisms, but with Britishisms, it's the Queen's English. But even though I say that in jest, because I do not speak the Queen's English because I'm from the South and I do not pronounce my T's properly. So it's Harry Potter. You want some water?
Have you ever read Mother Tongue by Bill Bryson?
Funnily enough, I haven't, but my late father, he was a massive Bill Bryson fan. So and I've just downloaded on Audible the short history of just about everything.
Right.
My dad used to tell me a lot of things about that, but please elaborate for the audience who
So
probably haven't
Bill Bryson is a great Englishman and or American. I don't know how you define. I think he's from He's from like Peoria, Iowa, but he's one of those guys that's been over in England like for 40 years and is now English in any capacity other than birth. Like sounds about as English as the Queen. I think he's now the rector of one of the northern universities, not Dartmouth. The name will come to me in a minute. There's a wonderful. See, he became very famous writing Notes from a Small Island, which is basically a love letter to England from an American that was very enchanted with it. You can see why that became very popular in England. It was very funny too. He's a funny writer. Yeah. He kind of like in his 50s, late 50s, maybe, kind of pivoted from being a humor travel writer to being a pithy science writer. And his trick is he's very good at doing really in-depth research and communicating it in a funny, distilled manner. My favorite book of his is Mother Tongue. And he goes through and just talks about the formation of the English language. And some of the things that he points out in there are, languages mutate very quickly. The idea that like the English accent is pristine and has always been like that, and then it spits out felons to Australia and they develop a weird mutant accent is not the right way to look at things. Everybody's accent's changing on the regular basis. And from what we know, Queen Elizabeth I probably sounded more like I do than she does to Queen Elizabeth II. And the reason that we can make that inference, having no records of it, is to try and figure out pronunciation when you go back in time. You basically rely on two things. You rely on rhyming poetry to see what letters people were rhyming. So, for example, you know if you read my poetry that when I use the word laugh, I am effectively using it as L-A-F-F. I'm not using it as lauga. You know that I'm pronouncing that as an F, right? So if I say laffy taffy, something like that, right? So you have that kind of thing. And she pronounced her R's based on that. The other thing you can do, which is less useful with Queen Elizabeth, it does give you a broad idea of accents at the time, is reading from semi-literate people, because fully literate people will write laugh, L-A-U-G-H, whereas a semi-literate person will write L-A-F or L-A-F-F, and you can see how people actually pronounce things at the time. Fascinating book about just kind of the development of English. And one of the things he points out is the rules that we sort of delude ourselves into thinking that English even has rules are at best consensus and are mostly frivolous bullshit. So like, for example, in English, we are told that we should not put a split infinitive at the end of a sentence, or we shouldn't put a preposition at the end of a sentence. I believe that's a split infinitive. So I can't say, I went out to get some of, I don't know, a preposition to the end of a sentence. Yeah. The reason for that is that in like 1800, all of the inbred aristocrats running England had a major boner for Romance languages and were just in the throes of continental envy of, like this weird English thing of like, oh, England's a wasteland. It's just Arkansas with castles and all these grubby Germanic people. The real sophisticated people were the Roman Empire, which means that Romance languages are the good languages. So they just started applying Latin rules to English, which is at root Germanic. And it didn't make any sense. It was like saying like, we love cricket, but from now on, we're going to play it like basketball. And so you get all these weird nonsensical things in the English language, or like the fact that we don't have a second person plural is crazy. And like any second person plural you use makes you sound like a yokel. That's nuts. That like if I say y'all, or you say you lot, like that, like it sounds colloquial and dumb. And it's like that. It's a very useful word.
I agree completely. It is mental with like language. Like my Megan, my girlfriend. She is a languages teacher. So she is half Italian. So her dad's Italian, her mum's English. So she speaks English and Italian. She speaks Spanish and also French. And she's also now on Duolingo learning a bit of German as well. So she speaks all these languages. So she's always very intrigued by the differences in the languages and where they sort of come from and the origins and things. When she was learning German, I was like, one thing about that is that you'll find that the pronunciation is probably easiest in German than a lot of the other languages. Because like French, for example, obviously every last letter you just ignore. And I can't fathom a more stupid rule in any language ever. It's like, why don't you just not have the letter there?
Yeah, French strikes me as a series of elegant honking noises. Like imagine a goose that's very wealthy. That is to me what all like, it like, cause you don't actually hit it. Whereas German has like very hard angular words, gleich nach. Like it's very like, you can hear those consonants.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, I can speak a very, very small amount of French, cause I learned it in school and things, but it's just so hard to wrap your head around and speaking in that sort of tongue. Whereas like German's a bit easier, and for me, Spanish flows a little bit more, and Italian and things. But one other thing I wanted to mention while we're still on the subject of sort of language and dialect is, did you find when you were living in the UK, one thing that I found astonishing when I realized is that you can travel for about an hour, if that, and the accent completely changes. And obviously in America, it's state to state, but the United States of America is more close to sort of Europe in its mix of like how close things are together, not in the cultures necessarily. Whereas England's its own thing, where it's kind of like, it's about a 200th of the size of the US, but we've got about a fifth of the population, thereabouts. So it's like the difference is there's so much crammed in certain areas. Obviously, a lot of fields when you drive through England and things. Yeah. But you just have to drive an hour or so in a different direction, and you get a completely different accent. Is that something that you found to be quite weird?
It was very surprising. It was very surprising. So like now I know that because I've lived over there and I've traveled through Britain pretty extensively. Being the fairly green guy from Middle America who had not grown up with a passport or any form of travel, I was very startled the first time I came to England. Again, now I can blend in and I can talk about tea, and I have opinions on lager and I can argue about like Boris Johnson and stuff. I have like opinions on Thatcher. Like now I can just blend in. You wouldn't know. And I look like a very handsome Wallace and Gromit claymation character, which I feel like works in England very well. And all my genes are, so like you can't tell for 20 weeks. Back in the day though, like getting off the train, because I came in from Italy into London and I'd never been there before. Americans who have not traveled have a very cartoonish understanding of Great Britain that was shocked. Like I literally, again, this is me as a 23-year-old, not as a 38-year-old worldly guy. I was like, why are these people wearing denim? It is my understanding that they all wear suits and carry umbrellas, and the fact that you all were wearing denim it really threw me off, because I had expected everything to be like kind of quaint and like not quite Victorian, but a little bit Victorian. Like I hadn't like,
Proper.
yeah, exactly. Chic and hip were not things that I realized were part of the British experience. So that's partly like, I think partly Americans, we in our film, we like to project, like we simultaneously lionize and demean Britain in the American cultural context. We lionize it in that, Britain is just stand-in for sophisticated smart guy. Like it's a really quick way in a movie of like, oh, he's got a British accent. That means he's very smart. He's a duke or a professor or something, right? And like, whereas like I have to say, you go to continental Europe, that is not how Europeans think of English people. Like as Americans, we think all English people are either dukes or professors or delightful cockneys. Like those are the only two forms of English people. Whereas like Germans think of English people as those obnoxious drunks who start bar fights at football games. Like
and both are correct in certain ways.
All of these things. It's a myriad country, right? So we lionize you in that capacity, but we also kind of demean Britain in that it is to the American ethos of like, we want England to be quaint. We want it to be old world because we're the kick and new party. And that contrast makes us feel like very vigorous and hip and important if you all are sitting in cottages drinking tea, arguing about the Plantagenets or some other thing that you don't really do on a regular basis, but it makes us feel that way. But yeah, to your point, Mike, the accents really threw me off. I mentioned that I like briefly worked for Speaker Burko. I couldn't understand half the people that called me, because at that time I knew, upper crust, like home counties accent, like not just home counties who went to Oxbridge accent. I knew that accent. I knew the like Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart accent, right?
Yeah.
And I knew the Cockney accent. I could translate that. I knew Daphne from Frasier was from some other town that didn't sound like these two things, but she's Cockney, I guess, because she's poor. Because I don't know how this works. People would call me and I couldn't understand them, and I'd have to go like, I'm very sorry. Like it was this weird thing where they'd get mad at me, which fair, they're calling their member of parliament and they're speaking their native tongue. Like I don't blame them, but I'd be like, look, I'm really sorry. Like they can understand me because they've seen all of our sitcoms, so they can translate me just fine. But I couldn't understand them. And then you get up to Scotland, and I can understand everybody in Scotland save Glasgow. Glasgow is just like a Glaswegian accent to me sounds like an Irish person drowning. It's just this like, hey, how are you? Oh, spotting this, you like that good. I'm not a pipe for all this, you like this. And you're like, that, okay, you're smiling. You don't look like you're going to stab me. I guess we're on the same team. Oh, the smile is beautiful. And so I can't code them. But yeah, but you guys do have just, the accents are completely different. It's actually very liberating as an American to come over to England and spend any time over there, because you realize that anyone in America that ever tries to talk down to you about pronunciation is utterly full of shit. So for example, like Americans that went to college love correcting people that say nuclear. It's nuclear. It's not nuclear. It's nuclear. Fuck you. Like I guarantee you there's like 40 towns in England where people say nuclear. And like in the American context, all English people outrank all American people linguistically. Like that's just how it works. You guys outrank us. And you can pronounce things, and like names for towns are different. Like in America, we would say Berkshire. In England, you would say Berkshire. Like you have a hint of French where like we would say Gloucester and you say Gloucester.
The Gloucester throws me off even now, to clarify. It's so many of the different towns and things. I mean, when you go to Wales or if you go to some places in Scotland, some of the road names are, certain of the places are just called crazy things. And you're just like, I don't understand. Like in England, we're connected to Scotland and Wales. Well, with the Scottish accent, as you described, there are certain parts of Scotland and also certain parts of Ireland and even Wales where if the accent is so strong in a certain region, as a Southern British individual, even though I've travelled to Wales a lot, I've been to Scotland a couple of times, but this doesn't make me understand Scottish necessarily more, but like one of my favourite films is Train Spotting, and I've seen a few other Scottish things that I enjoy, so the accent is more familiar to me, and I've had friends who have a Scottish accent and things, but with Irish, it's the least. I had one teacher that was Irish, so when I hear a really strong Irish accent, although Ireland is very close to the UK, I think I'd understand a strong French accent probably more than a strong Irish accent because of the amount of French that I've learned.
Yeah.
So it's one of those strange things where when it comes to, but in England, I think people are generally quite accepting in the most places of if you come with a different dialect. because our whole entire language is such a mess, and there's so many different dialects and so many different regional accents. When someone from a different country comes over, as long as the person isn't against immigrants and things, which is most people aren't, you've got that thing of, you know, the people's someone who speaks their language. If you're just trying to be English, you're trying to speak in English, we're more accepting. Whereas I know certain places in Europe can be a little bit more judgy if you don't speak their tongue perfectly. It's language is such a weird and strange thing that it's bizarre to speak about.
And that's probably innate. I mean, like one thing you're very accurate in pointing out is England unquestionably has more accents than the United States does. And that's even including immigrants that have come over and have an accent by virtue of being from India or whatever. Even including those, England has more of them because all of your towns are 1,000 years old. Or you know, maybe Southampton itself isn't 1,000 years old, but the town that used to be there was 5 miles north, and that was the one that was like the Roman fort, right? And it's also like Americans. There's a north-south thing where they kind of hate each other. There's definitely a red state, blue state thing, and then after that, it's just kind of football rivalry. Like, it's just sort of like, we don't like your football team. Whereas you guys, like you'll talk to Scots, they're like, oh, we hate that town. We don't like that. Even though we're all atheists, they stole the head of St. Fergus from our town back 1,000 years ago. We've never forgave them. And you're like, but you're all atheists now? Aye, we're atheists now. And like, they'll have these long running rivalries. I think you're right too. The accent thing, there's, who wrote this? It might be Arnold Kling, a guy that I interviewed on the Political Orphanage. Shout out to my show. He talks about how accents are probably not random, but are rather an evolutionary feature. So if we go back, human beings are about 300,000 years old insofar as we know, and we probably had language 200,000 years, maybe. I don't know, like at least 20,000 years, probably around 150 to 200,000 years. So our civilization is much older than recorded civilization, and the experience of being a human being as we would know it is much, much, much older and far beyond that of recorded history, way before the Egyptians. And if we go back to when everybody on Earth is a caveman, it appears to have been much more advantageous for you to immediately recognize an outsider than to be able to communicate with them. Today, communication's way better. If I see somebody coming down the street, the likelihood that they're going to kill me or steal my goat or you know, rape my wife or anything like that, very minimal, very minimal. The likelihood that they're going to like sell me a hot dog or you know, have like a review I should look at on Amazon, much, much higher. But that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be the case based on what we can piece together with just circumstantial evidence that for most of human history, being able to immediately identify an outsider or maybe even some nuance of like, well, that's an outsider, but they seem to speak our language, so they might be like a cousin tribe. Let's see if we have any kinship connections to them. Seems to be a thing. And accents mutate very quickly. Like, you know, teenagers make up bullshit words. That's normal. And that's a part of the human experience because human language fractures so very quickly so that we can do that. So I'm not surprised that monocultures would be more or less forgiving. I think a lot of the time, at least for the American experience, we're sort of viewed as we have a lot of racist problems in America, and we certainly have dark chapters of racism in America. But I will commend to your audience that we're also the most ethnically diverse country in the history of mankind, that we're very welcoming to foreigners. We bring in about 200,000 people a year, most of whom are not white. And a lot of countries that we sort of view as, I say as Americans, that we view as like wonderful, great social democracies are 2 million people monocultures where everybody has the exact same ethnicity, religion, and language. And it might be easier for them to think of other races abstractly, but when people come in, may not be as welcoming as even we would be. So that's my pro-American thing for a minute. We're not as racist as you think.
I mean, to clarify, like English people, we are, the way I would describe almost English people with Americans is, I think how Americans perceive it is you are the sort of older brother who knows better, who's stronger, and we're the kind of smaller, meek character that can kind of a bit more proper, a bit more not willing to do the sort of the hard thing that you need to do, and we're a bit more meek and kind of careful in the background, you know, drinking our tea because of it. Not saying you as an individual believes that of English people or that most Americans do, but the real strong stereotype would be that sort of, yeah, we're the big Americans, we're quite strong.
Yeah.
And a lot of English people do view Americans in that sort of way, but not in a, oh, they're here to save us, more they're the brutes.
Yeah.
They can be the ones that are too pushy. And it's interesting, though, we both are probably the most similar nations when it comes to our capitalist and consumerist and media consumption. But our political systems are somewhat mirrored. They're different. Obviously, you are, as well as being a comedian and an author and also a professional speaker, you are heavily into the political world. What was the term that you used to describe yourself as a political speaker?
I mean, I usually say I'm a gas bag, or I'll oftentimes say I'm professionally clever.
Yeah.
When it comes to I would say I'm a political satirist because my underlying ethnic group is comedian, but I do a lot of policy analysis. I hesitate to say I'm a journalist, although I do journalism occasionally, but I do a lot of policy analysis. And on my program, the Political Orphanage, I'm the two things that I tend to be most interested in. I'm really not interested in who's going to win the election. I care, but I'm not super intellectually engaged in it. What I'm really interested in is how people think. So like differences between how British people and American people think about problems and approach problems. That's fascinating to me. I love cognition and I like policy. I really just like going like, okay, this is the policy that we've got in place in terms of how we get taxes in our country or something like that, and like what works and what doesn't work. I really enjoy that kind of thing. So funny policy analyst? God, that sounds horrible, but that might be what I am.
Yeah, well, it's one of those where that's one of the areas that really intrigues you. And I've noticed from your various podcasts as well as your various guest appearances and things, you are somewhat, we have similar interests in the way that I think you are just basically interested in everything. There's a few things that specifically pique your interest more than others, politics being one of them. But you are basically just like, I'll talk to almost anyone about almost anything, and I'll try basically anything at least once. And it's that kind of mindset of just because of that, you have such a diverse audience and your podcast. I wonder if, like, I will not speak of the numbers, but we spoke about them before pressing record and things. I wonder if the reasons that our shows aren't, say, in the stratosphere, one would like to think, if we are good enough, is because although you have a more focused niche than I do, it's still that kind of generalist nature, which makes for better content, I think, but it makes it harder to market in some ways, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yes, and I think in my case that I am to a great I don't want to say hamstrung. It's a slow build for me for that reason. I don't think so much for me. It's because I'm a generalist. Although I do like, interesting, you should point that out. I wish I'd picked a different podcast name than the Political Orphanage, because people, a lot of the time, the orphanage bit people get, oh, okay, he's probably not a super Republican or a super Democrat. He's somewhere else. Great. That's accurate. But I think the Political Orphanage, a lot of the time people infer, oh, he must just be talking about Senate elections and government. And it's like, really not. I don't do that much politics. I mostly do policy and how people think, and I'll bring on neurochemists and things. In terms of what I think keeps me from getting to that stratospheric level, and I don't think that I'm precluded from ever doing it, it's just a much slower burn, is at least in American media, my guess would be in British political media as well. The quickest way to build an audience is to hate another audience. So if I wanted to be a really big character, what I could do, and I've had some opportunities to do this in my life, and I've eschewed them, are if I renamed the Political Orphanage Drinking Liberal Tears with Andrew Heaton, I would be able, conservatives would see that and go, ha, I hate those guys. I'll listen to this dude. And then I would rant about how liberals are even worse than you already thought they were. And you're even more right. And like, this is how, folks, this is what they're really like. This is, and I would do that. Or conversely, if I did a show called like, Fighting the Fascist Bigoted Conservatives with Andrew Heaton, right? Same thing. It's on the progressive end of these knuckle-dragging hillbillies, you know, with their stupid guns, and they hate gay people. And like, it would appeal to that set. Things which rely on out-group contempt tend to be very emotionally evocative and fill a need for a lot of people. Now, I would argue not a good need, not a side of myself that I like or that I wish to enhance, but a lot of people like that. They like coming to media because they want rage and a feeling of self-righteousness. And I've worked in partisan media, and I refuse to do that with my life. I refuse to be a person that sells hate or fear for a living. I won't do it. It would be a lot faster if I did that. And I'll say, just from a marketing signaling mechanism, even outside of my self-righteous tirade that I just went on, it would be easier to reach conservatives or progressives if I were to hoist a flag very quickly, or pick a group and go, I'm a super libertarian, I'm a super whatever the thing is. For me coming in and going, I'm an independent, I'm trying to figure these things out. I don't like red team versus blue team dynamics, and I'm going to bring on a lot of interesting people and try and get to the bottom of this. There are people who appreciate that, but the problem is they're not all hanging out at the same place. Mm-hmm. Like if I just wanted to go get a bunch of conservatives, I know where to go. You go to conservative shows. But if you're trying to find nuanced, intelligent people that have friends they disagree with, there's no central place they hang out at. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, when they find my show, they tend to be really relieved. It's kind of like, I don't know if you ever would have had this experience being in England, but like in Texas, it's really hot. You're walking around and you go into a grocery store, there's an air conditioning unit, and you're like, oh, thank God. Let's just look at meat to avoid being in the heat for a while. Like they kind of get that from my show, where they're like, oh, I could learn, but I don't, all the horrible emotions I don't have to deal with.
That's a very good way of putting it. I mean, with my show, where I have like a huge variety of guests, it becomes more difficult to market in the sense of like, if you like anything that's not necessarily what's popular. I don't specifically go out my way to not choose popular individuals or talk about popular things. I just don't really take any notice of it. So I'm just like, who do I want to talk with? You know, I get people contact me who want to come on the show. I have people that I reach out to have on the show, and I just kind of go from there. I really love Star Wars, so I talk to a lot of people involved with making and being in Star Wars and that sort of stuff. And so that's a part of it. But then I also love talking to people about music, and I love from like death metal all the way to like classical music. I also like a lot of rap music. So I like a little bit of everything. So when you come to, you know, what tags or who do you want to market to on Facebook or wherever, who are you aiming for? It's like, well, I'm kind of aiming for anyone who is like, I almost describe my show as any person could find any episode in my catalog that they would enjoy, because I've spoken about everything aside from sports and in-depth politics. I've spoken about political things in various episodes, but like in-depth political analysis, aside from that and in-depth sport and in-depth cars, I'd say I've spoken about pretty much everything in general, you know. So it's like, how does one market that? And I try my best, and I obviously only have a finite amount of time to be able to do all these things. So I wanted to ask you sort of, why did you start a podcast in the very first place? Like, I've got the notes here. There's the one which was, I mean, you've also got the Political Orphanage, and you've got Alienating the Audience, Losers, Pretenders, and Scoundrels. But then you also have got was it
Friday Release Valve?
There's Friday Release Valve, but there's also Something's Off.
Okay,
with
right.
Andrew Heaton as well, which I think finished around 2019.
That's right. Yeah,
so
that's right.
All these things, like, which one was the one you started with, and what made you start a podcast?
So 4 of those are actually the same show. They're just sort of split and butted out. So I was originally doing a daily show on a network. Mm-hmm. Which was fun because they paid me, and I didn't have to convince people to give me money. That show, that daily program, was called Something's Off with Andrew Heaton, which was political commentary like I'm doing, which is, say, policy analysis and author interviews and talking to people about how people think. And I also did a lot of sketch comedy, and I did a lot of humor in it. So it was funny, it was political, but it was anti-partisan in the outlook on it. I also was doing, because it was a daily show, on Fridays, I would just do a segment called Friday Release Valve, where it's like, we've already done 4 very heady episodes at the beginning of the week. Now I'm just going to bring on a comedian friend. We're just going to make fun of funny headlines. This is just to enjoy your car ride home. It's Friday. I'm not thinking anymore. You don't have to think anymore either. And then about once a month, we would do a thing called Alienating the Audience, where I would talk to my producer and I was like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to try and shake loose the entire audience by being as nerdy as we can. I'm going to bring on a friend to talk about the novel Dune in regards to OPEC and petroleum. And we would just go really hard, like both of our virginities would grow back, like that level of nerdy. And what I found was that about 80% of the audience was like, I'm going to not listen to this one. But then 20% was like, yes, talk to me about how Blade Runner is actually an exegesis of Hegel, whatever the thing is. So in 2019 or 2018, I can't remember the date. I think 2019, the show got canceled, and what I ended up doing was the network was nice enough to let me do a goodbye episode, and my elder brothers in the podcasting community reached out to me. I told them, I was like, hey, I just got canceled. And they went, immediately go on Patreon, immediately go do that. And I was like, I don't know if I want to keep doing politics. It's so awful right now. It's so abysmal and people are such dickheads. Can't I just do something else? And they were like, you can, but, this is going to be the best opportunity you ever have to get people to assist you in this. So the last episode of the show, I went on, thanked everybody. It was very funny, nice, poignant. And I went, hey, look, I don't know if I want to keep doing political media. But if I do, it will be via Patreon. So if you want me to do it, go to patreon.com/Andrew Heaton, and I'll keep you abreast of the situation. And fortunately, my friends were correct that enough people that were listening to the show regularly were really sad that it was ending and were like, oh, nuts, I liked that guy. Yeah, I'll give you $5 a month or whatever to keep doing this. I would be willing to pay for that. And so the show started. Now, I had originally, it became the Political Orphanage, which I probably should have kept it as something off as in, but I renamed it the Political Orphanage because I thought it'd be good for marketing, and made it a weekly show. I thought it was going to be a temporary thing I did for grocery money until I got a real job. I was thinking, like, if I can make $60 a week at this, that's like that. I don't have to get food stamps for a while, or maybe I'll get the food stamps and I'll pocket the money. And it got more than that to where it was like initially it was like $200 or $300 a week, and I was like, that's almost rent. That's like, this is approaching subsistence level. And kept at it. And then it got to that point, and it kept growing, and it still continues to grow. The show incrementally grows every week. And so I did that for a while. Eventually, I got so sick of American politics during the build-up to the 2020 election cycle that I decided to spin off Alienating the Audience as its own show, and just make a show that was entirely science fiction, and have slowed down on that one a little bit. I've kind of bitten off more than I can chew, Mike, where I now technically am the host of 4 different podcasts, and it turns out I can really do 1 or 2 on a weekly basis without a professional producer coming in with a clipboard and sobering me up and pointing me to the booth. I don't have the bandwidth to do, but I still do it occasionally. And did that, really needed the middle break from it, and also kind of hoped that I would just develop a different real estate, independent of politics. And then eventually, during the pandemic, I hadn't done Friday Release Valve in over a year, but during lockdown, listeners started reaching out going like, hey, it really sucks right now. Could you just do the Friday Release Valve thing again to just give us a break from the horror that is life at this moment? And I thought, if ever there were a moment where I, as a comedian, really can contribute and actually, like, this is an actual public service I can provide to people, this would be it. So I brought that back thinking it would be 2 months. Not realizing the pandemic would, be 2 years plus. Did it for a while, and eventually it was just such a weird thing of like, on Wednesday I'm going to talk to George Will about how the electoral system should be the same as opposed to blah, 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 blah. But then on Friday, I'm going to have a comedian talk about how a naked guy robbed a taco truck with a sword in Florida. And eventually those things seemed weird enough to me that I spun off Friday Release Valve as well. So it's its own podcast now that's just comedy. Which is nice because I found that a lot of potential comedian guests did not want to come on the Political Orphanage because they were afraid it was going to be overly even though I explained to them, this is a Friday segment, we're just doing comedy. They were worried about coming on, but they're not worried about coming on an explicitly comedy show. And it gives me leverage too, where if they want to go on a political tirade, I can kind of stop and be like, look, I get that you're very fired up about this, but I talk about that stuff for a living, and this is my break where I get to talk about naked guys robbing taco trucks. Can we focus on that? This is for my benefit. And then the final one, the newest podcast that I added, Losers, Pretenders, and Scoundrels, which is the history podcast. That one is just because my best friend, Andrew Young, just sucks at long distance friendships. He's really bad at it. I'm pretty good at staying in contact with my friends. He's rubbish at it. He'll go like 6 months without calling me. And I finally figured out he's bad at just staying in touch, but he's real good at projects. So I tricked him into spending time with me by forming this podcast. So we now do it every week, every other week. It's just a way to hang out with him. I don't really care if people listen to that one or not. That one's just a trick my friend did, but it's a lot of fun. It's a history podcast with 2 comedians. We just pick an interesting person from history and discuss them.
That's amazing. I mean, Yeah, it's a good shout, I think, to split them at that point. I mean, for me, I've just got my two shows, which is I've got Star Wars comics and canon, and it's a Star Wars comic show. I read Star Wars comics and I give people the plot details, so they don't need to have read the comic necessarily, but I also do various connections to things in there. It's like, these are the species you've come across before, this is the character that's popped up here before, here's some recommended reading, blah. So it's that sort of thing. And that obviously would not work on Genuine Chit-Chat, which is what we're on now, which is speaking about anything. It's just a conversation. That's why it's called Genuine Chit-Chat. It's just listening to people talk, and for me, it was kind of that thing where I wanted to talk about things, like random thoughts would occasionally come to my head, and I would talk to people about them when me and my friends would hang out on a Friday night, and it was like, oh yeah, we don't really want to talk about that stuff right now. We just want to chill and not talk about anything that serious. We just want to kind of, that sort of thing. And I was like, if I want to talk to one of them specifically, I can, much like you've done with your latest podcast, I'm just like, if I want to talk to one of them about this sort of thing, I can just ask them to come on my podcast, and a few of them will come on the show. And in the early days of the podcast, I was just talking to people about subjects that, if I just called up one of my friends and said, hey, would you be okay with just talking about sort of anxiety and how it's affected you and how you've kind of got over it? They'd be like, what, you want me to come over here and bare my soul out to you for an hour or so and then leave? Like, yes. They'd be like, what? If you say, it's recording it, you put a microphone inside. We spoke briefly about it earlier on the show.
No, 100%. Like the astronomer royal of the United Kingdom, Lord Martin Rees, came on my show because he heads up an institute at Cambridge of trying to assess extinction level events. And I was like, man, I want to talk to Lord Martin about, or Lord Rees. I don't know how that works. You say Sir Martin, but Lord Rees, but Lord Rees about this. But if I just called him up and was like, hey, I'm some guy, want to talk about asteroids? That wouldn't have happened. But if I called it like, listen, I've got this show. I'd really like to talk to you about this because I work in policy analysis. And he was lovely guy, came on the show, and I wasn't able to ask him all the science questions that I wanted to do, and was like, I have the sci-fi podcast. Do you want to come on that? And he's like, yes, I'd be happy to. And so the following week he came on, and it's mind blowing. I'm some dude from Oklahoma. Like I graduated from the University of Oklahoma for my undergraduate degree. The extent of my scientific training is trying to understand things from Star Trek that I heard in the 90s. And I'm able to talk to, arguably the top mathematician in the United Kingdom, and I'm asking him questions about light spectrum and how gravity works, and and it's like, this is amazing, and the podcasts do open that. I do wonder in your case, Mike, because I can relate to the getting hobbled by the generalist thing. My experience has been in the world of podcasting that there's this sort of stated reason people come to a podcast, and there's the unstated reason they come to a podcast. So. Like a lot of podcasts, less for me because I tend to, maybe with my history podcast, but not with Political Orphanage. A lot of podcasts have a dedicated cast where there's usually 2 or 3 guys, and they're really good buddies, and they're going to talk about something, true crime or conspiracy theories or whatever the thing is. And so people will go, oh, I like that show because I like true crime. But in reality, what they're really coming there, I think, is they like the feeling of being around a kitchen table with friends. There's a kind of surrogate friendship vibe to them. And so I'm aware of that when I do my shows. So like with the Political Orphanage, the sort of stated thing is, I want to learn about stuff, and I want to be challenged, and I want to talk to deep thinkers. But the unstated thing is also, I'm not going to make you feel like shit. And I recognize that you probably have friends you disagree with, and you now feel it's very strange that you're one of the people capable of this. And you're going to get to feel this sense of relief in hanging out with like-minded people. So in your case, what would you espouse as the stated and unstated thing people are getting from your show?
I'd say the stated thing is the conversations that people have, the conversation that I have with the variety of guests. It would be learning something, having lots of different perspectives, and kind of each week being something different. I think that's the stated reason. I think the unstated reason would be, from what I've heard from certain feedback from listeners, is the way that I present questions to certain guests of mine and the way that I speak with the guests and the hosting that I bring myself, which is harder to market in certain ways, especially there's nothing that specific that's easy to explain and market, just of a buzzword or anything about me that makes me stand out from other people necessarily.
Yeah, that's the problem with generalists, is that the generalist podcasts tend to be kickstarted by celebrities that already have a massive following. So the marketing mechanism is, hey, this person that you already know and love is going to have very broad conversations, where if you're like you and me, who are nascent celebrities, but not established public figures, we have that problem. I wonder if you couldn't gamify it. So my buddy Brian Brushwood, who's one of the guys that's really helped me in podcasting, one of his pieces of advice for me was, whenever I start a new podcast, he's like, I should be able to say, welcome to X podcast, the only podcast that Y. And if I can't explain how my podcast is the only podcast that does this particular thing, it's probably going to fail. So, for example, my sci-fi podcast is a lot of fun. I really enjoy doing it. I don't know how it's unique to a lot of other established sci-fi podcasts. So probably it's not going to be able to build up steam the same way these older legacy ones are. But like in your case, I wonder if you couldn't like just go, welcome to the podcast. Every week we are trying to find the most interesting person in the world. And at the end of every year, because how old's your show?
It's about 4.5 years at the moment. It's coming
Great.
to 5.
So this benefits me directly. What I would like, I think at the end of every year, you should have all of your listeners vote on who the most interesting person is, and then you fly them to Southampton to have lunch with you. And you record it. Yeah,
if I could afford to fly someone to me to Southampton, that'd be delightful.
You know what? I bet your audience would step up. I think if you were like, look, yeah, let's say I'm probably going to get runner-up. I'm just assuming here. I'm gonna be like the vice president of fun, interesting people, but I'm not going to be the top one's going to be some other guy or gal. Great. Okay, cool. If you come on the show and you're like, do you all remember that guy I talked to who's like a former Green Beret Navy SEAL astronaut that like briefly dated Lindsay Lohan and Kate Middleton at the same time before he punched Prince Philip? That guy? I want to fly that guy to Southampton. I'm going to give him a medal that says most interesting man of the world, and I'm going to fly him to Southampton. Would you give me $10 to do that? And then you do like a Kickstarter campaign. I bet people would step up and do it.
That's an interesting perspective. They may do that. That is an interesting idea.
This is just me trying to get a free trip to England, you know. Right? You realize this is not good advice. This is just me trying to figure out how to get you to pay me to come to England.
No, I'm not necessarily. I mean, I have got Patreons and things, so I do make money. Well, I say make loosely. I still have to have a 9-to-5 job and things, but I do still get money from my patrons. And I also want to clarify, even though I'm talking about not able to market myself, I am very happy with my audience. They are delightful. They are incredible to have and things. I appreciate all of them and all the nice messages and reviews and etc. that I do get, and everyone listening and things, making the show possible, because I have had some really cool guests on. So it's not a thing of, it's just always that kind of desire of more. And the answer is to invest more time in marketing the podcast and working on those sort of things.
And going on other podcasts too, right? Like that's what I'm doing. Well, that's on your show to promote my show.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's something I have been trying a little bit recently, but where I've been in the process of buying a house, like all my free time has been going into viewing houses and then doing documents and stuff and spending time with my partner in certain times and things. So it's just like the last 6 months, I haven't guessed on as many. So it's one of those things where I'm trying to soon, later in the year, I'm going to try, and I think definitely next year, once I've got the house and everything's kind of sorted.
It's tough, man. Like I've got all these things I should be doing to promote my show, and just getting the show produced is such a mammoth undertaking that I don't. It's very difficult for me to get ahead and go now like I really want to do a foreign policy week. Normally I do one episode a week, and I do a bonus episode for people on Patreon. I really want to do a full week of foreign policy where I do like a full episode on this is what happens in the event of nuclear war. And then I bring on somebody to talk about like why America should be a very robust presence abroad. And then I bring on a non-interventionist. Well, it's difficult for me to do 5 episodes ahead of time. Like I'm doing an entire month's worth of work for 1 week. It'd be fun. I want to do it. I feel like it'd be useful, but also it's hard for me to get ahead of the game. And I'll circle back. I like that, Mike, I like that you like your audience. That's because like, I don't like, that is a really, that can go off the rails. And that's a nice thing. If you've got an audience you like, because I know people in politics, particularly in political media, who are afraid of their audience. Yeah. To harken back, like the people I'm thinking of know that the purpose of their job is to shovel red meat down people's gullets. That's either yay Democrat or yay Republican. And they also know that as a result of that, if they don't deliver, they're in trouble. And that their audience is coming to get very angry and to get fired up to go fight the bad guys with a rake outside. And it really limits their ability to do things. And like, I've been really pleased with my audience. My audience mostly doesn't agree with me, which I like. Cause it means that I don't have to I'm not hamstrung in that capacity. The only thing I found is that, and I think this isn't my audience, I think this is universal. I think people react very negatively to contempt. There's a very big difference between saying, I think you're wrong, versus I think you're an irredeemable yokel.
Yeah.
Or I think you're a dumb bigot versus I think you're mistaken. There's a big difference between error and sin. And there's a big difference between disagreement and contempt. And I find that like my audience really likes being challenged. They like me bringing, the favorite guests we bring on are people that I disagree with that I get along well with. Like when it's a friend, we're arguing, but we like each other and you could tell we're probably going to make out or maybe get drinks or something afterwards. They like those episodes. And I've kind of like, early on, I'm so glad I did this. I kind of like, I don't want to say trained the audience because that sounds a lot more Pavlovian than I want it to come off as. I established the cultural norms for the audience very early in my show. So I was doing a daily show and I would bring on, every week. It was a rule I had with my producer. I want to make sure you book me a conservative, a progressive, and an other every week. I don't want to fall into an echo chamber phenomenon. So I want to make sure that we've got different perspectives we're bringing on all the time, which was a really big hassle for him, and he didn't like me for it. But I think it made the show better. Well, as a result, the audience was inevitably going to be confronted with somebody that they didn't agree with. And what I started doing, or maybe my opinion they didn't agree with, when somebody would write a really nice email of like, "Dear Mr. Heaton, I enjoy your show, but I really disagreed with your take on why we should get rid of bail money in favor of whatever the thing is." I would read it on the show and go, "I just want to say how much I appreciate you listening to the episode and how kind and polite you were and how much I enjoy that this audience engages with ideas that they disagree with by being rational and kind." And it kind of like it sent out a big signal flare to everybody of like, "Yep, this is how to approach me." And it was great. It established that like now, like my hate mail is absurd, Mike. My hate mail is like at its height, at its most frothy, my hate mail is Canadian. It's like, "Dear Mr. Heaton, I love your show, but I took umbrage with something you said the other day, and here are 3 reasons that I think that you should reevaluate your position." Like that's 3 reasons why you should reevaluate your position is like the height of anger on my show, which is great. I really like it. I don't fear my audience. They're nice. I don't have to worry about having weird ideas. And so it's good. I'm glad it sounds like you've got kind of a comparable thing going on.
Yeah. One of my audience members, they wrote a review and said specifically, they're like, although Mike has people on that I don't always agree with, I still appreciate the way he kind of presents it and things. And I don't agree with everyone completely, and I will counter to things, but generally speaking, it's more about just hearing what their perspective is. It's on my show, it's just like, I'm just interested to know kind of what makes a person, but also what their areas of expertise are and what their special favorite things are. And when I have certain individuals on the show, sometimes I'll talk with them and we'll talk over such a wide range of topics. It'll be like, okay, now when you come on the show next time, let's just kind of vaguely focus on this kind of thing. And I do have repeating guests, and there are a pool of people who are familiar that come on occasionally, and my girlfriend Megan is one of them. We're coming up near the end here, but before I want to wrap up or anything like that, I just want to ask about the thing which is kind of why we got into contact in some ways, is something we haven't even mentioned, which is you promoting your newest book.
Yes.
So I thought if we want to spend a few minutes just tell us about the book, and we'll kind of go from there before sort of finishing off.
So listen, English people, y'all like books, but you never have enough books. You like reading. There's not very many, right? Isn't that the problem we all face? Don't worry. Lord Uncle Heaton wrote a new book. It's called Inappropriately Human, 21 Short Stories. And it is a short story collection that I'm going to say is kind of half funny, half Twilight Zone. So a lot of it's science fiction. Some of it's downright literary. There's a pretty wide range of the types of stories. But it oscillates between being interesting thought experiments in the realm of science fiction, a la Twilight Zone, Black Mirror, Outer Limits, or being funny, a la Douglas Adams or Dave Barry. I put a lot of time and effort into it, and I've been very pleased with the response that I've got from it. I just got an email a couple of days ago. There's a teacher here in the States who's going to buy 60 copies and use it as a classroom material. And I was like, hell yeah, I'm going to start warping children early. Plus, I think in my case, the best case I can shoot for it, Mike, is being ironically hip in my 50s. I think that's the coolest. I've never thought I was cool. I don't think I'm ever going to be cool. Ironically hip might be something I could do. So I'm like, yeah, start getting those high school students now so that when I'm all gray and I'm not a threat in any way, shape, or form, I'm cute. And then they invite me to stuff. I'd recommend Inappropriately Human to people. And then if you've got like an Audible subscription or you've got something like that, you're looking for an audiobook. I had an audiobook of it come out in the last month or two. I narrated it. So if you've already fallen in love with my voice and you're semi-erect just listening to me, you could get fully erect as a man or a woman.
I know I am.
Well, yeah, exactly. While listening to it. So Inappropriately Human, 21 short stories.
That's wonderful. And I was going to say also, what made you write the book, and also why write short stories? Because that's not a medium that is very often tread. Obviously, you've got certain authors and certain groups of things which are known to be anthologies and things, or anthologies, or just individual short stories, however you want to sort of frame it. Or connected short stories rather. But like, what made you write short stories? What made you write this book?
So, writing a short story collection is a really bad idea if your goal is to sell a lot of books. And I say that not because the series is done or the book is done poorly. I've been very pleased with it. But short story collections are notoriously difficult to sell. Because in fiction pretty much is. So like I'm working on a book right now that's a nonfiction book about tribalism, groupthink, in-group versus out-group dynamics, tentatively titled Tribalism is Dumb. If I came on your show and I said I'm the author of a book called Tribalism is Dumb, it explains groupthink, your listeners could go, well, I don't know who that guy is, but that seems like an interesting topic. Fiction's harder to do because you're like, well, I don't like, what's the book about? Well, that sounds like a good premise. What kind of writer is he? And then short story collections are even harder because you're really just banking on the narrative ability of the author rather than even the premise, because there's multiple premises in it, right? So for example, on my sci-fi podcast, Alienating the Audience, I interviewed Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian and Artemis and some other books, very beloved and very decent, nice guy, I should add, science fiction writer. And when we got off microphone, I mentioned that I was planning to do this, and he was like, hey, just so you know, I wouldn't do this, and I'm Andy Weir. Except he said it in a less egotistical version. He really is. He's a great guy, but he basically was like, look, like I've got a giant audience, and like, you know, I've made millions of dollars writing sci-fi novels. I won't write a short story collection. So it's not a great idea. I did it really because I love writing, and I'll keep doing it until Congress forces me to stop. And I don't. It would be great if that became a mainstay of income. If it never happens, and I just get the odd school teacher that is going to use it as teaching material, I will be content with that. I very much enjoy doing it. In my case, I had written a bunch of short stories maybe like 10 years ago, and the idea at the time had been I was going to try and get them published at various magazines, and then through that maybe get a book deal. And it was such a complicated, laborious process to get something published in another place so that I could get an unrelated thing published that I eventually gave up on it. But I was writing short stories for fun over the last couple of years and realized after a while, oh, wait a minute, I've actually got a full book of short stories. It's just that I've never thought of them that way before, and thought, well, I'll go ahead and I'll bundle these up, put them out. And then my new plan is I've got like 3 or 4 unpublished books right now that are just sitting there waiting to be edited and published. My new plan is to just publish them, or try to get them published annually on my birthday. That way, it's not a day about me dying and about entropy and me marching towards death. Rather, a celebration of me making a thing and doing a book signing that all my friends feel guilty avoiding and have to come out to go to. So that was the most recent one.
Nice. Well, I appreciate that I want to say one thing I've learned from listening to your both the podcast that you host, but also the podcast you've appeared on a lot, is that a lot of your humor, and this is a high compliment, is that it reminds me of British humor in a lot of ways. It's very word based. It's very witty. It's very much about, and you've got the self-deprecation. I'm not saying that only British comedians use self-deprecation, but a lot of the elements of British humor that I enjoy. You know, you've got obviously the very slapsticky sort of side of British humor, just like you've got a lot of things, but like in the sort of the wordplay where you've got just the whole humor in whatever you're watching or consuming is just in what's being said. I appreciated that level because obviously you are also a stand-up comedian as well. And I think it does come across in even the way you present yourself when you are on your own or other people's podcasts. So I was when I was looking up information about you, because I'm stalking you, when I did that, it was for obviously you to come on the show, and I was very pleasantly surprised because a certain guest I listen to, and it's more so like, okay, what questions here were their answers not as interesting for, or what have they said 100 times in every podcast they've ever come on, compared to, you know, for you, I was like, there are so many things here. We've touched like one of my bullet points, and that was just vaguely about like what was Scotland like? Of all the things. So it's really good having your stand-up comedy come through and make you the witty and the funny side of things, while also being a generalist in the sense of that you are interested in a lot of things, makes you for a great podcast guest. So I really appreciate researching you.
That is a whole bucket of compliments I'm going to put in my back pocket. That's very kind of you. Thank you. I accept that compliment with great respect and gratitude. And the English humor I take with great honor. If I could flatter myself, I would like to think that I am attempting to emulate some midpoint between Will Rogers and John Cleese of having that kind of fake pomposity combined with the occasional folksy kick. So I'm attempting to inhabit that space, and I'm very glad to hear that the conversation came off well. And Mike, I really know what you're talking about too. Like one of the things that I have to do on my show on the Political Orphanage, I do a lot of author interviews, and not everybody knows this. Not all authors are good at talking. A lot of them are really good at writing, but they're not good at talking. And it being an audio medium, I have to kind of be careful about that. And then one of the other things that'll happen is you'll have somebody that is good at talking, but they've done the interview 50 times and they're bored with it, and you can hear it in their voice that they're doing it. And I think comedy does help in that capacity because selfishly, comedy is I like making people laugh. It makes me feel good. I get all sorts of cool neurochemicals squirting through my brain. And I don't know. I'm sure there's some, I'm smart. Everybody likes me. But I think charitably, comedy is sort of at root about making other people feel good and about having a connection. And having that connection requires having some sort of actual communication in the present rather than just giving you boilerplate all the time, right?
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with you. And what you said there about there are certain individuals that, like, I've spoken to, there's a couple of authors of Star Wars books that are some of my favorite guests, and some of the people who have done a lot of interviews and things talking about the books and things. I specifically have to listen to their podcasts of other interviews they've done and be like, okay, when did you first get the call about writing Star Wars? What was your favorite Star Wars character? Like, these questions are interesting, but if you've heard at least one interview with some of these people, you know exactly what they're going to say, and trying to find those elements inside of that. It was, it can be, and with writers and things, as you've pointed out, it can be that, and other times it can be, okay, how am I going to turn this into kind of a conversation without giving them one-word answers? Like, do you think this book is better than the last book? Yes. Okay, well I thought you were going to talk about that a little bit longer. So I found that out more early on when I talked to certain friends and things who weren't really wanting to go on mic and said, not that I pressure them in any way, but I'd ask them and they'd be like, okay, it's not my kind of thing, but I'll do it for you, so I'll do it. And this person's kind of like, in your case, it's like, I don't really do it, but I want to sell the book, so I'm going to. And so there are elements of people, but I think you, as a host, you do really well.
Thank you.
Well, to wrap up,
it helps twofold in my show, because it helps one a lot. Like, I don't think people realize how infrequently authors are actually interviewed by people that read their book. That's pretty rare. They're going on a ton of radio shows where the producer is handed a note card with bullet points that say this book is about Israel, and that's it. That's all they know, right? And but for people that do the research, and you're very clearly a guy who does your research. I do my research. When I bring an author on, I'm like, hey, like in chapter 8, you said this thing that made me think. Well, and generally they'll be so happy that I took the time to read the book and formulate questions about it. And then the other thing too is when it gets into that boilerplate mode and I can sense it now, I'll try and throw them off. Not because I want to make them feel bad or look bad. And the last thing I want to do is for anybody to come on the Political Orphanage and sound stupid, but I do want them to be real with me. Yeah. So like there's an author I really like named George Will. I've been a big fan of him growing up. He's a really, really smart, erudite political commentator in the United States. And I had, as you've done, listened to a bunch of episodes that he'd done on other programs before he came on mine. So I knew his lines because he had the same lines. You know, in 1882, 50% of the American public lived within 20 miles of Tidewater. And I could hear that. So I just started asking him random questions like, if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you have? And he'd like kind of like you could hear the gears turning in his mind. But it sort of forced him to be like live in the moment. And we ended up getting lunch. It was fun.
That's delightful. It's one of the great things about podcasts. So to wrap up, because I mean, we could talk for ages if I had unlimited time, which means you'll just have to come on again. But please tell people sort of what, obviously you've spoken about the Political Orphanage, and I did, I think briefly mention your other podcast, but please tell people your podcasts, the best place people can find you on social media, your website, and your book name again. Just kind of final plugs, before I stop the recording.
Let's see. I'll try and overwhelm everybody. On Twitter, I'm at Mighty Heaton, Heaton. I tend to just fire off jokes and things on Twitter. I don't know. You're not going to get any hot takes from me. You're just going to get funny things I got while I was drunk or high that I put on there. If you enjoyed listening to me and you thought I was an interesting person, I would first recommend you check out the Political Orphanage, because I think it does tend to be the broadest things that I discuss. I know it has the word politics in it, but it's a lot of author interviews, cognition, policy, that kind of thing. If you don't care anything about that, but you do really like science fiction, and it sounds like there's a lot of crossover that you might, given your Star Wars show, come check out Alienating the Audience, which is my sci-fi program. We just did one, like, this is how nerdy it is. We did one last week just on Moriarty in Star Trek The Next Generation. So, like, just talking about the Sherlock Holmes character that's in 2 episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. If that appeals to you, check out Alienating the Audience. And if you were like, that guy's funny, but I don't want any depth, at all, then check out Friday Release Valve, which is my comedy show, or quasi-depth, go to Losers, Pretenders, and Scoundrels, which is my history podcast. And finally, if you're like, that guy was great, but I hated the sound of his voice, but I love killing trees. But I don't like that guy's voice, but I liked him as a person, then buy Inappropriately Human, 21 Short Stories, my latest book.
But if you don't want to kill trees, but you still want all that stuff, then you can get it either on Audible.
Yeah.
Is there an ebook version, maybe? Or
yeah, you could get it on Kindle, or get all 3. Maybe you hate trees and you like my voice.
That's absolutely wonderful. Well, Heaton, it was wonderful having you on the show, and is an open door for you to come on the show anytime you want in the future. And, there are so many elements that we could just talk about and have a whole another hour or 2 to discuss. So I'll surely make the time to be able to have you on again. But just thank you. I appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you.